Our motion today is this house would arrange students in classroom based on their intelligence and academic performance rather on their age. We live in a world where underperformed students are undermined, condemned, and marginalized, and the overachieving students are stuck and hindered from maximizing their potential. That's why we want to arrange students in classroom based on their intelligence and academic performance rather than on their age. Also, with the concern of ageism and bullying that's happening in education in the world. 4 points of mechanism today. Firstly, we'll do an evaluation test after elementary school and after junior high school. That means it cannot be used as a selection method to pursue higher education. But secondly, the standardized test will be made according to each country's education system and curriculum. Thirdly, we'll test the academic capabilities such as social studies, math, science, but we're also going to test their scholars potential test or TPA as Indonesia. But fourthly, we're going to accommodate decent and qualified teachers to every class. That means we're not going to give or provide bad teachers in a lower rank class, or that's unfair. 1 point of disclaimer, we don't think that students that have significantly less academic performance are unintelligent. We understand that some students are underperformed due to their environment, education system, or that have a lack of comprehension to certain subjects. The things I'm going to talk about, firstly, on how the system has been franchising underperformed students, but secondly, how it's going to be helpful for students and teachers to excel in their subjects. First argument on how it has been franchising to students. Underperforming students are badly left behind in their studies and they lack years of education. They get left behind for years in high school. They get to high school at the age of 18, for example, as opposed to 13 or 14. This is because in developing countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Latin America countries, there are children that skip school for two reasons. Firstly, they live in a poverty, which means they have to help support their family's financial situation. That is to also work and get blue-collar jobs, or that this means that they don't have time or energy to study. But there are also students from middle to low class who cannot afford tutors. Even if they can go to school, they cannot afford extra classes such as Intel or to help their studies. So it's very much for them hard to get to higher education or to comprehend lessons. But secondly, there are students who have lesser cognitive capabilities, which means they have difficulties to comprehend simple or too complicated situations and concepts such as math, biology, chemistry, and whatnot. These students are also afraid to ask questions because of the pressure that they have, meaning that they are afraid to ask help from friends or their teachers from fear of being judged. They are scared that they're alone, that they are the ones who don't understand the subject, and the others and the smarter ones do. Second layer on how the status quo government has failed to provide inclusivity and accessibility in education. Some of us are very fortunate that we can get free public school in Jakarta. Unfortunately, the vast majority of students in the world can't afford that luxury. Two reasons why. Firstly, there are the ones who cannot afford to pay the tuition, which means that the students have a huge threat of the moment they choose to go to school, which means that they have to take loans and their parents will be burdened with this kind of thing. Their parents have to work 3 jobs a day. For example, they themselves have to work for lunch, money, and food. But secondly, there is little to no accessibility. This scenario happens in rural areas such as the borders of countries or in rural areas such in Borneo Islands and Papua. And it's because of the lack infrastructure as basic as roads, bridges, or mass transportations to transport them from their homes to their school. This is the reason why there's a lot of children who drop out of school. They're overwhelmed, they are tired and exhausted by the stigma, they are exhausted by the burden of paying tuition and whatnot. And the problem here is that it's unfair that these kids who got dropped out or quit and fail to graduate get condemned and marginalized in society and get this stigma that they lazy, that they don't like education and whatnot. This is what we don't want to happen inside the school. Moving on to my second argument, how this will help students and teachers to improve their performance. We understand that teachers can be overwhelmed with the workload that they have to do. We also understand that they have a limited attention span for their students. The problem here is that it's very hard to accommodate students' needs. Three reasons why. Firstly, understand that the same age of students does not mean that they have the same academic performance. There are older students who need extra attention to understand simple mathematical questions, but there are also younger students who can understand a few minutes of lecture from their teacher and can go on to another lessons. This means that it's going to be very hard and saturated for the children to focus on its students because they have to cater to 15 to 13 students each class. But secondly, teachers have the pressures to improve students' performance. The pressure comes in the status quo from school rankings, standardized tasks, college admission rates, and whatnot. If they fail to teach the student and improve or make the students become excellent students, which means if their students fail the test, fail the class, can graduate, the teachers are the ones who will be punished and condemned. Meanwhile, it's impossible to try to comprehend all children with different performance to become extensions. That's why a lot of teachers try to only adhere to some students who have the potential to go to college, for example, students who have easier comprehension and whatnot. But thirdly, bullying and seniority is the concern that worsens the circumstance. Because now the school's attention is distracted to eradicate bullying because of the different age in classes like sophomores, juniors, and seniors, as opposed to focusing on creating that-based method or creating the best education system in their school. This is why we want to propose that we should arrange student classrooms based on academic performance rather than age and apply our model in the status quo. The result of this model is then, firstly, teachers can adjust their teaching methods in each class. This means that in high-performance classes, they can go through lectures and materials much faster. Students can study more efficiently and they can do more complicated homework. For example, they can ask complicated questions without being scared that they will demotivate their friends that are less in their academic performance. Now they can ask very good questions on their subjects. They can know details of the subjects and whatnot. But secondly, teachers can focus on the underperformed students without the pressure to adhere to the others. That means that they can adjust to make more understandable concepts and simple and complicated concepts understandable for students who are underperformed. But secondly, teachers can adjust their motivational words during lectures. So firstly, they can talk about Ivy League or a very high achieving college that doesn't give pressure to underperform students because they don't feel like it or they feel insecure because of it. But secondly, now they can talk about and want to motivate underperforming students to inspire them and whatnot without having to ignore that the high achieving students. Now they can adhere to the underperformed students and motivate them without having to demotivate them by talking about Ivy League or a high-performing college. But thirdly, there will be no ageism, ladies and gentlemen. This means that they can treat others, even younger and older, with more respect. How is it likely? Because when the age is more saturated and not the academic performance, they have no choice but to get to know each other and work on group projects and go through several years of class together. That means they have to communicate, they have to talk about their assignments, they have to talk about their projects and whatnot. This means that they have a higher chance of communication instead of the status quo where it's very saturated with their juniors, sophomores, and seniors, where communication is limited to extracurricular activities. For example, now in the status quo with our motion, they will gain much more respect for each other regardless of their age. They will gain more perspective on the idea of being left behind in school. For example, oh yes, I'm older than you, but I'm left behind because of ABC. And it will open much more perspective to other students. That's why we beg to propose.